Welcome back to another episode of the Educational AD Podcast. We couldn't do these without the incredible support of our sponsors, and we want to take a moment to say thank you to all of them. First, thanks to our diamond sponsor, Varsity Brands, including BSN, Varsity Spirit, and Herff Jones. Varsity Brands, elevating student experiences in sport, spirit, and achievement. We also want to thank our platinum sponsors, including our newest sponsor, Booster Digital Displays. Revolutionize your game day experience with Booster Digital Displays. We also want to thank Camp Mobile, where leaders communicate better. Vital Signs, bring student achievements to life. Ephesus Lighting, innovating a brighter future at every level. Gipper, sports graphics made incredibly simple. And Hometown Ticketing, simple and easy online ticketing. Thanks to all of our great sponsors. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Educational AD Podcast. Our guest today is Chris Hall. Chris is a certified master athletic administrator, and he's the assistant principal and the athletic director at Discovery High School in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be on. Just a big fan of the podcasts in the last year of between yours and some of the other ones with ADs, and so this is exciting to be on here and be a part of it.
Well, we appreciate your support. I guess you would be what we call a friend of the show. So excited to have you on. As you know, it's a busy time for ADs, and we're going to jump right into it. And we always like to let our listeners have a chance to get to know our guests. So tell them a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you ended up as the AD at Discovery.
All right, sure. Well, so in a long way, both of my grandfathers were in the military. And so when I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, and the military on one side had brought my grandfather there after a lifetime of service, and my other grandfather did his service and then was like an engineer for McDonnell Douglas. So I guess you could say like my parents were moved there. My dad moved there his first time living back in the States when he was 13. And my mom had moved from California when she was like 7 or 8. So they met in college at UAH, and so I grew up there in Huntsville. And for those people that not really aware, Huntsville's a really neat town. It's believe it or not, they have a lot of NASA and Space Camp and all sorts of rocket science stuff. So it's a really fastly growing city from the 50s on. And so I had a great time. And when I was growing up, you know, I was lucky that my grandfather took an interest in me. I was his first grandson, and he lived really close by. And so I was just blessed that he took me to pretty much everything. I followed him along to the golf course when I was 4 years old. He cut down clubs, and he took me to baseball, soccer. I think even the 1 year I played basketball, he was there. And so he was always there at every practice, you know, yelling. He was probably the only other person besides my mom that would yell my full name if he felt I wasn't, you know, doing what I was supposed to do. And so I always had him. And he was there in the summertime. You know, we had the YMCA, but we didn't have to go there all the time just because he was willing to come pick us up. And I have 3 younger brothers. And so he was willing to, you know, watch us. And but unfortunately, he passed away in 1995 from cancer. And so that being, I guess, kind of a rock that was there, we ended up, my mom and my stepdad did, you know, being government workers. I guess the rock, and my grandmother still lives there obviously to this day, but the opportunities came about after the space station was built, and my mom could move to DC. And so we ended up moving to Washington, DC, in the Northern Virginia area. And so, you know, there I continued on, and we moved in there literally like 3 days before school started. And talk about differences, moving from Huntsville, Alabama, where good schools, but you go to Fairfax County, Virginia, and they truly believe that they're one of the best school systems. They are definitely one of the largest, and just the diversity was just eye-opening. And moving up 3 days before school starts, you know, it's just interesting. and you were literally living out of boxes and too late to sign up for football, and got signed up for baseball and all that kind of stuff. And before you know it, I got back into sports. And I still remember a kid on my team. His dad was a high school football coach, and he remember he had a conversation with my mom. He's like, "This is the best thing for him. Get him back in sports as soon as you can. Hate that he missed football, obviously, but next year we'll get him playing football again at the high school." And so it kind of started off that way, and started to make some friends. And so I go to high school. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. There in 8th grade, I ended up. I had always been a good student, and I started having issues, and ended up getting diagnosed with diabetes. And so here I am, almost 13 years old, or just barely turned 13 years old, and you're a type 1 diabetic, and you spend a week in the hospital. And again, this is 1996, so it's changed quite a bit in 25 years. But I was hard-headed and did not know how to take care of myself. And so we get to high school sports, and I played football, I played baseball. I was going through there, and my doctor, I guess I didn't have really good control. Not a guess. I know I didn't have good control. I was pretty hard-headed, and my mom would try and talk, and I'd be like, "Mom, I know what I'm doing," and obviously I didn't. And the doctor was basically like, "I'm not signing off on your physical. Like, you will not play high school sports next year." And I'm sitting there like, "You got to be kidding, right? Like, come on." And so she was like, "No, like, you don't take care of yourself. This is the one thing I can hold over your head." And I was like, "All right, what if I just focus on kicking and punting?" Because my freshman year, I played fullback, and I also in a wing T offense, and we also I ended up punting because the coach was like, who can kick a football? And you all grab them and punt and see who goes the farthest. And I had played soccer when I was younger, so I had a little bit of background. But so I cut a deal with my doctor, basically, like, let me be a punter, kicker. We had another kid that's all he wanted to do. So my mom was like, "Okay, cool, you can still do it. It's a happy median." And my high school coach, he ordered some videos from the internet. He says, "All right, well, here's a couple of videos from this Dallas Cowboys guy." He says, "Watch these videos, and you guys go down that field and kick by yourselves. And 2 hours later, come up here and run sprints." And that's typical back in the day. I believe you were a football coach, so
yeah.
You know how the specialists got treated, kind of. And honestly, it was probably the best thing that ever happened, because from that point on, it became one of those things. Well, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it good. I had some natural, I guess, ability to kick a ball from playing soccer, and so we were playing a game, and a coach we played against ran a kicking company named Bill Renner, and he was the head coach at the time at Langley High School, and he had played in the NFL and at Virginia Tech. And so in the summers, he was like, "Hey, why don't you come to this camp we have at Lehigh University, kicking and punting camp?" Okay, cool. And so me and my kicker friend Brian, that was in my grade, we go up to Lehigh that summer, and you would never think this. There's 130 kids kicking and punting footballs. And it's all high school kids, maybe some younger kids, but a lot of college kids. There's NFL guys. And we're out there and we're like, "Man, this is crazy. It's like going to camp for football, but we only do like 2 things." And so before you know it, man, just met some unbelievable friends, just had a great time. It led to a lot of opportunities. And, I guess getting recruited at the time, that before all this, rankings and all this kind of stuff came out with social media, it was really kind of word of mouth, and you had to go to a camp to get to impress a coach. And so, I had started getting a lot of attention and letters after that sophomore year. And I remember, talking to some coaches, but my junior year, we'd had a state semifinal game, and I'd had probably the game of my life. And Florida State was there recruiting. I think Michael Robinson, who ended up playing at Penn State, and there was a bunch of coaches from Penn State and Virginia Tech and all sorts of stuff were there. And so I ended up that summer, I went to camp at Virginia Tech and down at Florida State. And obviously, I thought I did well. And so the opportunities to either walk on or get scholarships at a number of schools were starting to come around as a senior. And so I ended up choosing Florida State. And that's kind of like how I first reached out to you, being from McClay and Tallahassee, and there's a little connection there. And And so honestly, that's kind of what got me there. But the blessing, going back to becoming a diabetic and all that kind of stuff, my brothers, I have 3 younger brothers, like I said, and 2 of them ended up, they wanted to probably emulate me in some respect, and I wanted them to learn, and I taught them how to punt. So my younger brother Brent ended up, playing in high school and doing really well, and went to Virginia Tech, and he ended up getting drafted in the NFL by the Bucks in the 6th round. And my youngest brother Grant went to Virginia Tech, graduated really early, went to Liberty and played at Liberty for a couple of years as a punter. So my parents, I guess, ended up working out well for them, the money they invested in camps and 3 of us being college athletes and stuff. And so it kind of just led to a really cool, it's like a fraternity. If you're within specialists, like, with Steve Weatherford and Graham Gano and like all these guys that played in the NFL. And I'm like, yeah, well, I roomed with him in camp, and, he's just as nutty as anyone, and, or a great guy. And, but it was really cool. You'd go to camp and there'd be, Joey Hilbold from Notre Dame and I can't remember the guy, he was from Florida's Steve something. And it was like, you're here, and it's like, yeah, but at camp, we're all just guys and hanging out and having fun. And so that was kind of a really cool experience. But obviously that was kind of the college sports background. Florida State, obviously at the time, the late 90s, had played in 3 straight national championship games. And so if you watch TV, and I went to high school in Northern Virginia, so everyone was a Michael Vick fan. And I was rooting for the Seminoles in that game, like the outcast of everybody. And because I just like Florida State. I thought they were cool watching them in the 90s. I mean, I don't know anyone in the country, unless you're a diehard Gator or Cane fan, that said, hey, that wasn't cool to watch Charlie Ward and Peter Warwick and some of those guys that Warwick Dunn and kind of watch them and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I ended up. And then, after college, I wasn't sure. The NFL thing was one of those things where if you're going to try, you got to put 110% in. And I remember kind of just having that feeling where I wasn't interested in even pursuing it. And part of it was I wanted to go to grad school. I wanted to get my master's in sports management. I had that opportunity I had already gotten accepted into that fall of 2006, that program at Florida State. And so I just kind of wanted to stick around. I mean, Tallahassee is a pretty cool place. And I had met my wife, and we actually started dating that summer of 2006. And so I had a lot of reasons, I guess, to stay around. And, and so I just stuck around. And after grad school, a couple years later, my wife is from the Atlanta area here. And so with her connections, we ended up moving back here. That was 2008, and the job market wasn't exactly sizzling for too many people. And so I started off as a parapro. And so I think someone else on a podcast may have taken that adventure to go, literally climb the ranks from being a parapro to a special ed teacher for several years to became a general ed teacher. I wanted to become an AD, and they created here in our county, they made that position when I got hired. They said all ADs are now going to be assistant principals moving forward. So there had been kind of a mix before. And so essentially that's where I am. This is my 5th year here at Discovery, and the 6th year the school's open. So I really was not here the first year, and it really, sometimes I wish I had been, because I really enjoyed building that brand and trying to see this thing kind of come to life. But man, thinking back now, my mind just starts thinking, like, if I could go back and do things from the very beginning, it would be really, really fun. So there we go. That's probably a good brief bio that covered those first couple of points there for you.
No, that's great. I always love to hear the stories, because we all have different paths that get us to where we are. Let's go and talk just a second about that, coming into almost a brand new school. I've done that a couple of times in my career, and it's just so cool to be there at the beginning, helping to start traditions. What are some things that you think that you've helped to contribute to that culture at Discovery?
So that's always one of the things that we talk about. You typically think of a school opening, and it's because maybe, school A has gotten to the point where they're, 3,500 kids, at least here in Gwinnett. they've reached this 3,500 or 4,000 students, and they've got trailers everywhere. So they split off, and it's literally from one school, they form a new school. Well, my school is in the middle of Lawrenceville, which is an older part of town or of the county. And we formed from 5 different schools. So rather than like be on the outskirts of where, people are spreading, we basically, because it was becoming so centralized as well, they built a new high school right in the middle. So can you hear me? Okay. So basically right in the middle of 5 different schools. So when you talk about building traditions, you're trying to like undo what maybe some of these students have already had at 5 different schools. So it's not just like from breaking from one tradition. And you also have a lot of opinions from teachers, from students of, we should do this, we should do that. And I'm also, I'm at a Title I school. And so it also becomes difficult just financially. There's other factors that kind of play into that. So I think if there's something we've done really good, it's we've built an atmosphere where we celebrate even the little successes. I've preached to my coaches about doing the right things. And this year has been just an incredible year to watch us blossom. We've made the playoffs in 5 or 6 sports already. We're already set to make the playoffs in a couple others. And you're talking about in the course of the first 5 years of the school, we never made the playoffs outside of boys basketball in any sport except for cheerleading, one season. So you're talking about a lot of close calls, a lot of building, and we took our lumps against those really well-established schools. But I just preached to my coaches, stay the course. And I think when it comes to celebrating the little things, where I don't have money to go put up nice plaques and really nice decorations around the school, I do have a vision of, all right, I'm going to do this year. Next year, I'm going to add a little bit more. So I try and do it little bit by bit, what I can afford. And as well, the other thing that doesn't cost anything is social media. I feel like we do a really good job of social media. I've got some of my coaches that do a really good job of promoting their kids, promoting their team, promoting other programs. It's still an area where I think we can get better. But I think a couple years ago, I bought an app on a company that helps you make schedule edits or game day edits and score updates and stuff like that. And we use that a lot. And I was doing a lot of it the first year, and this year I've trained a lot of my coaches. So like my football coach just put out his spring sports practice schedule the other day. And so that's good. That I like seeing that. I like seeing them making signing day things or just highlights of like players of the game. For my soccer coach is doing a great job of he took headshots and doing that. So those are things that I feel like we do a good job of. Like, we don't have the money. We're trying to build, and obviously I don't have a blank check to just do it all at once. But as you're trying to build, you have a purpose. So we're trying to do it so it looks right, but also still celebrate and do what we can, understanding who we are at this point.
Yeah, it's such an important point in any school. You talk about the little things, we would call those in those building years, so small victories, because you have to go through that period to get to those bigger, more public victories. And again, I'm really glad you mentioned social media. It doesn't cost a thing, and it's the way, not a good way, it's the way to reach your kids. I had a guest on recently, and she made a point that I'm still doing some research on, but I think she's probably right. She says our student athletes are on Twitter, but our students are on Instagram. And she said when she started posting athletic stuff on Instagram, she just, started adding, followers, et cetera, from her school, the students that, oh, hey, this is pretty cool. So I'm exploring that, but I think she's probably right.
I just created an Instagram account about a month ago, and I have no post on it yet because I created it and I was like, all right, that's the first step. I'm going to take some pictures and figure out how to add them. So that's the next step, because I think you're 100% correct that the students, that's what they tell me. Because I also do some student leadership here, and they all tell me like, well, we'll put it on Instagram. And I'm like, why am I not on Instagram for that reason, like you just said? But I also track this, and this is another thing. It does cost a little bit of money. We use VNN, Varsity News Network. I know a bunch of people use that nationwide. And they send that monthly report of how many page views you have. And I literally show my principal in my meeting, like my mid-year or update. I'm like, look, here I am. I'm in the top 10 for the state of Georgia out of 150 schools for page views. And I'm right behind the schools that are on paper, socioeconomically 100% different than me. And I'm right there in the middle of them because I take pictures at the games. I upload them myself. I write articles. We do updates just in doing that stuff. And I'm like, I still don't even think I'm super active on there. I feel like I'm active, but I want to get better. And so we have a plan next year. We're going to do some work-based learning projects, and I'm going to hire some students and basically create, some student photographers, some student journalism pieces, and tie that all in together. And essentially, it's not going to cost me anything other than I'm batting around the idea of maybe giving them some free prom tickets or helping offset their senior class dues. And so my principal seems really honestly, a lot of it's her idea too of creating those positions, because she sees like other schools like, why don't we have students out here taking pictures? And I'm like, good idea, great idea. So we've had some brainstorming sessions, and so I look forward to that next year, honestly, by getting even better.
That's another great workshop or LTI course right there. So
yeah. Oh yeah.
Hey, I don't want to skip over this one.
Oh.
We always like to hear about the people that had an impact in your life, those mentors. And I'm going to guess your grandfather is probably near the top of the list, but who are some of the other people, and you can talk about your grandfather too, that impacted you and helped you become the leader that you are?
Oh yeah, no, definitely my grandfather, just being there. I mean, he was great. Just, if you knew him, he was the kind of person that, he played golf when he was retired all the time with his buddies, and he would pretty much do anything for anybody, like give the shirt off his back kind of person, and never charge anything more than like a 6-pack of Busch Light. I mean, he was real cheap, like not even expensive. It was relatively cheap. And so, but just everyone that talked about him, and after he passed away, I still went back and would play golf with some of his old golfing buddies. And here I am, a teenager, playing golf with his friends that were retired. They were 60s, 70s, some in their 80s. And they would still send Christmas cards. And I'm like, man, that says a lot about what kind of person he was. He was really good with, he was an engineer, so he was really good at fixing cars. And like, he was their local mechanic. He would go to the place and do that. So I learned a lot about just, just work ethic, treating people the right way, selfless acts of kindness, that kind of stuff, like service leadership or servant leadership, all that kind of stuff. Like, I feel like I picked up a lot of those characteristics from him. And so I definitely lean on that, I feel like. But when you talk about like just mentors in high school, really teaching in general, I mean, everyone's had those teachers that meant a lot. And I don't think there's maybe not one necessarily that sticks out more than the other, but I would say several of my high school football coaches, I had a couple of high school or head coaches, Folio and Coach Skinner and Donnie Warren and Coach Cotter. And I felt like they were all there as father figures at one time or another. But probably one of the most important was we had this guy named Doug Wilbarger, and he was a Marine Corps veteran, 5-time Purple Heart recipient, and just an amazing human being. And we asked him one time, we're like, Coach, why did you get 5 Purple Hearts? Like, we thought you got 1 and you got to come home. And he was in our U.S. history class just talking that day. He was as a guest speaker. And he said, because I got a Purple Heart, but I wasn't like injured to the point I couldn't return. And he's like, I got shrapnel in my arm, but I could go back out. After I healed up a couple weeks later, I said, I'm going back. And I was like, when everyone else was running from Vietnam, you chose to go back and ended up with 5 Purple. I've never in my life heard of people having more than maybe 2 or 3. And so the fact that he had 5, and it was like, my first couple years of high school, we used to joke with them, because we called him calves, because he was, 5'7". His calves were about 5'7" around. And he was like this little muscle bound guy. But just like when you started, you learn a respect for people, like, man, like someone that was willing to do that. And then here he is running a business, but here he is coaching youth football for basically free, coaching at the high school. He would give scholarships to kids left and right. And I think about him, like, man, what a great man to just emulate some of that characteristics. And his son is actually now a head football coach up in Northern Virginia at a relatively new school called Tuscarora. And they just started their season a few weeks ago because of COVID. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's his second year there. And I'm like, man, that's really cool. I mean, Brandon's probably a couple years younger than me. And I remember coaching him when he was a 110-pounder and he was playing with my brother and being like, now here he is, a head football coach and making his dad proud, I'm sure. So, but, we had another couple of people at our high school. Melody Modell was our AD, and she's actually from Huntsville and was an AD in Northern Virginia in a long roundabout way. It's kind of crazy how those people come across your path. And I told her who my dad and uncle were, and she kind of looked at me weird and she says, was your uncle? And I was like, yeah. And she shook her head and I said, okay, because she knew him in high school. And I said, well, that's good. And I said, I know what kind of, my uncle was he was more of the rebel rouser before he went in the military and had a good time. So a hell of an athlete, but he was not known for like going to class, I guess. And so back in the day, but and then Coach Santabria was actually the assistant AD and I was a football coach. And he's now the AD at Centerville, where I went to high school at. And I think he's been there for 25, 26 years. And I don't know that he's been the AD probably for about the last 16 or 17 of them by himself. They used to have a AD, an assistant, or actually it may have had 2 assistants. And so just people like that were always positive, super encouraging and stuff like that. And obviously the kicking, when I got to kicking coach, I became really close with Coach Renner and Fred Pinciero, and it worked with a lot of guys and they were just great. Mentally, they used to always say things like, when you're working out, they would never accept failure. So when you're out there, it's like anything, you do things, it's like, 10,000 times before you can perfect it or get good at it. And so they'd be like, well, you're not leaving until you hit 10 punts in a row that I consider a 9 out of 10. And he didn't care if you had to hit 100 balls and he knew your leg was feeling like jello. He's like, you're going to do it, because mentally, if you can't do it when you're tired, you can't do it in a game in front, against Miami or whatever. And lo and behold, he was right. I mean, you do it and eventually get to the point. But then when you go into a game, and like my first game I ever started was in the Orange Bowl against Miami and Monday Night Football. And I had probably the game of my life with Devin Hester back there returning punts. And
wow.
I think he had 2 returns for like 12 yards, couple fair caught, and I averaged like 45 yards that game, and literally probably the best game of my life. And I remember thinking like, yeah, the whole time I was hearing my coaches yell in my ear, like, do this, and just focus. And I, the last person I talked to before I left the hotel that day was Coach P. And so I still remember like those lessons, though. It made it easy when you got out in a game situation because you had done thousands of hours of work and stuff like that. But and obviously, like, I mean, playing at Florida State, John Lilly was my position coach and our recruiting coordinator, and just a great man. Just never heard him cuss in all my years knowing him. Not that makes him any better than anyone else, but I found it odd. I'm like, man, even Coach Bowden let one slip. I remember, and Clint Purvis was our team chaplain and ended up doing my wife and I's wedding, and then obviously Coach Bowden. I mean, if you can't mention anyone in the state of Florida or anyone ever watched the down of football and doesn't know Bobby Bowden, I don't know where you've been. But to play for a man like that just to see him, the humbleness, to see his conviction and his religion and how he treated everybody was something. And he would always talk about in a roundabout way, I guess, like having perspective and persistence. And perspective is something I always took with me, because he always would talk about, well, you got to realize why this person, may think differently than you, or this person, their background and their culture, and it brings them to a different thinking or understanding of something, but you have to be able to understand and have that perspective. And how he would just be able to like meld people like from, South Florida and Miami and Jacksonville and all over the country with different backgrounds. And then to sit there and listen and be a part of that was truly something special. But I just always obviously admired him for a number of things, but I don't think if you were picking role models or someone to take characteristics from, he would be a bad person ever.
Oh yeah, what a great experience for you, and I appreciate you sharing. Okay, I think it's great for our
Yeah.
listeners to hear that. Chris, you already talked a little bit about discovery, but one of the things we like to do with the podcast is this idea of sharing best practices. So, what are a couple of things that, either initiatives that you've started or things that have developed that when you take an objective look at your school, you can sit back and say, boy, we do this better than anybody. What are a couple of best practices you can share with us?
I mentioned a little bit about the social media. I don't know that I'm by far like amazing at it, but I feel like I do it better than a lot of people. It is kind of disappointing when you want to look up something about a school and you go look and like, man, the last time they put a tweet out was in January, or or there's not just, it's like hit or miss. Like they decided for 1 week to do something and then they didn't, and they haven't done anything for a month or two, and so I'm like, well, at least I feel like I'm pretty active on there. The other thing is like, again, we don't have a lot of maybe traditions here, and this is maybe not something just here at Discovery, but I think finding a couple of really close friends at other schools and sharing, like learning Google and that ability to share and put things on Google Docs has been something that I've really been working towards the last couple of years. And I feel like that's where, if I was to maybe look around, where I hope I'm maybe ahead of others. I know I'm behind a number of people, but at least in some respects, I know that getting ahead of sharing and making it easily accessible for my coaches, or sharing with other ADs who have similar situations or ideas, that just learning Google and how to use that creatively to our best interest and work smarter, not harder, it has been a blessing.
I think it's just great that you're developing that. We talked about culture at your school, and again, your willingness to share with others. Let's talk a little bit about your journey with your state association and with the NIAAA.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of young ADs that listen to our show, and I think it's important for them to understand that journey of taking that first LTI course and sitting for that exam and then ultimately turning in that CMAA project.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, from the moment I really got into education, I wanted to be an athletic director. Originally at college, I wanted to work in college athletics. But once I got here, our AD at my old school in Norcross, my wife had been his student aide when she was in high school, and so she was a cheerleader there, and they were brand new football coaches, and so I had a little in, I guess, with them, and I really needed the money, and it also gave me opportunity, like, hey, I've worked events, there's an opening for gym manager, yeah, I'll take it, here I am, I'll do it. I'm in grad school, I'm a first year teacher, I'm coaching 2 sports, but I'll do that too. And then when I was continuing grad school and I ended up giving up baseball, and so I went and I was a game manager for like lacrosse and soccer, and I would just soak up everything. I would just go to his office and let him know too. I think letting people know that you're interested was important. And so when opportunities came, like, we revamped physicals, and I said, why are we making copies of these? Why can't we put them on like an Excel sheet and keep it by date? And so and we revamped the physical, like shrunk it down from like 10 pages to 6. Just little things to like kind of help a little bit, and just organize things in a different method. Like maybe where I'd say, I guess you see not like a problem, but like, hey, I could probably make this better, and just offer my assistance. And honestly, anytime, like even if I knew he was out late at a game covering a away basketball game or something like that, and he'd say, he'd ask like, hey, can you get my morning duty? Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll go in there to the cafeteria, grab the mic, do whatever is needed. And so I think doing that. And so when this opportunity came about 6 or 7 years ago, they were going to do like a aspiring AD program. And I'm not going to throw shade, but I know the first county to do it was our county before some other counties did it in Georgia. But here nor there, we did it. And I was lucky to be in there, and I definitely appreciate that opportunity. And so sitting there, but part of it, he was like, why don't you go to the state conference? It's in Savannah. I'm like, sure. I've been to Savannah once. It was a great time. And so he signed me up. He said, here, here's the first couple of classes you take. So I think I took like 501 or 502, the first couple of classes that they offer, and did the initial AD meeting, and really had a blast because I love hearing from other people, all the different schools, South Georgia, North Georgia, you have Atlanta, you have a mix of so many different, similar to Florida, where you just got big city, small time. How do you do it on a budget? You have everything from every gamut. And so that was fun. Obviously, and then like the time you spend outside of the classes is fun. Obviously, they definitely create a good atmosphere. I played in the golf tournament the first few years and got to meet some really interesting people, great people that I can rely on now that are at different schools and school systems. And so that was fun. And, just kept taking classes. And I got to the point after, I guess, about 4 years, 2 years ago, I could take the CAA exam. And so I was like, why not? Might as well. And took it and passed it. And I wish you'd actually get a score on it, because I thought I did well, but I'd love to know what I actually did. But that's just the competitor in me. And then when COVID hit, I had kind of thought in my head, like, hey, I'll probably a couple of years out from doing CMAA, because you got to get so many classes. And again, we don't have the money here. So my principal said, you can go to the national conference like every third year. So I had went to San Antonio and just loved it. Had a great time out there. But when COVID hit, I saw those online courses and I'm like, look, I got no events, no banquets. I was in charge of a couple of summer events for the county, and basically those got nixed. And I'm like, all right. So I sat there and I think I took like 8 classes during COVID. In like March, April, May, I would just sit there and in my basement and take those online classes. And I got to the point where I was like, I think I can get my CMAA if I just do a little bit more. And I had the project. So I signed at spring break a year ago. I signed up for, someone did a little webcast or a podcast, not a podcast, webinar.
Right.
For the NIAAA. And I was sitting there I remember my wife was like, I went onto the porch and there was pollen everywhere. And I cleaned off one spot so I could sit outside away from my kids and everyone I could hear. And I was like, all right, it doesn't sound as daunting as a task as it, like I had in my mind built up this massive like portfolio and like research papers. And I'm like, so it was like, I had this like daunting. And then after the meeting and the guys were like, I talked through like an example and they're like, yeah, just do that. And I'm like, perfect. So I did my CMAA on our county produces a lot of football talent nationwide and then the NFL and stuff like that. And so I ended up doing my project on a football media day. We hadn't had one. And so I created a football media day, brought in, guest speakers and organized all that. And basically wrote that up as my project about how I did it. And in the future, we're going to expand to flag football since girls flag football just got added here. And so that was kind of it. And so from a state or national level, I haven't done anything. I haven't held offices or anything like that, but I feel like I'm still young in that respect. And that's kind of like the next step is I'd love to, get involved at some level at the state level on maybe get on a committee or something like that. But, and that's probably one of the next things I'll probably look to explore.
I think it's, again, so important for our EDs to hear about that journey, that the first step is, hey, volunteering, and then, taking advantage of those opportunities that present yourself. And then the other thing about your project, you're absolutely right. It is not supposed to be, this, mythical, imposing sort of task. It's something, what are you already doing that you feel passionate about? And then you simply document and tell the story of how it came to pass. So great job. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Chris, another question we've been asking our EDs since we've started these revolves around this idea of social awareness or social justice. And the question I've been asking is this: what can we as athletic directors, what can we do better for our kids, for our communities in this area of social awareness?
Man, that's a great question. I know I had put some thought into this, and my mind was kind of going everywhere. Just I think a lot of it goes back to that whole idea of like understanding that perspective of like, I was born and raised a certain way. You were born, raised a certain way, and everyone that we come in contact has different perspective on they may feel something is happening because of this or that or whatever, and everything in between. And so I think that ability to understand, put yourself in someone else's shoes, have an open mind, be willing to listen and understand, empathy, all those kind of things. Like, you have to have some of those characteristics in order for us to move forward. I think about it, you know, when I went from Alabama, which is definitely white and black, there's just not a lot of other diversity there. And then you go to a school where I went, Centerville, we had probably 115 countries represented, and talk about diversity, and DC is like a melting pot. And so it was definitely eye-opening as far as that goes. But like, as my mom always mentioned, like, the opportunity probably was great, because you looked around, and DC is a microcosm of what you see in probably every other urban city to some extent, with the diversity. And so going to high school, which I feel like those years are really formative. Yes, you learn a lot when you're little about right from wrong or certain things like that, but like, really, that character and who you are is really probably more defined, I feel like, as more of a teenager and as a young adult. And then by the time you've reached like a true adulthood, like, your character is kind of what it is. Like, you're not really going to change much. But I feel like when you're a teenager, you have a lot of ability to grow, and maybe one or two instances can change who you are. But what I like to do, my football coach is about a month older than me. Same year from high school. He played, he's from not the inner city here in Atlanta, but he is from like Cobb County, Sandy Springs area. And he's black. He played at Samford, which is another good, academic college. He played in the NFL, he played in the CFL. And so we just started talking a lot, like last spring, summer, when a lot of incidents were happening. We got back together, really, it was summer, I guess, when COVID allowed us to get back together. And I have a track coach who's Haitian, but actually went to Florida State, similar time frame when I was there. And so we would just sit there and talk, and talk about George Floyd, or talk about different things. And honestly, sitting and listening and hearing their perspective on how things happened, their experiences, like, really was eye-opening to me, because ultimately, like, this summer we had a lot of discussions, our county ADs and our football coaches, and our district AD. I really am thankful for that. He brought us all together, and he said, look, if we're going to change things in our schools, we can start and make an impact in our schools. And it starts, honestly, a lot of places, it's your big athletes, your football players, maybe basketball players. And you hate to say that it's them, but they have a lot of influence. And he's like, so in this room, we can make a difference here locally, in our county. We have 19 schools, very diverse county. And so we had a lot of discussions, and my football coach, being African-American, was able to have a voice and say some things where I was like, you know what, even though we've never made the playoffs and we've only had one or two wins each year, I'm glad that he has that platform and ability. And so when we had our head coaches meeting this year, I set aside time. I talked to him. I said, hey, I want you to create some dialogue. Like, let's start the questions. Here it is. It's the end of July, 1st of August. And I said, it's your stage, like, you come up with something, what's on your heart? What do you want to talk about? Because as a coaching staff, like, I can stand up there, but I can't speak to the same, life experiences as he can. And here he is, had a way more successful football career than I did, but some of his experiences, because he's an African-American, definitely different than mine. And so it was great. I felt like a lot of my coaches felt really good about it. And we had some more discussions. We did a little bit of that inside out stuff about your why, and I kind of tied that in. And so our next time we had a professional development day, I let him lead a group of my veteran coaches through some different experiences and stuff like that. And so I feel that opportunity to, I'm not saying necessarily empower someone like him, but I do feel like here he is, we're the exact same. Age-wise, everything should be the same, but our experiences differ. But I want him to have an ability to talk and learn leadership. And so I feel like if I can do nothing else, it's provide opportunities, it's listen, it's make make opportunities. Like I asked him, before, I'm like, we had a conversation. He's been my football coach for 5 years. We made the playoffs finally. And again, doing the right things the right way will build over time. And so I truly believe in that. And I'm a big believer in him. And I said, hey, now that you've done that, the next step is, do you want to be a football coach your entire life, or would you like to be an athletic director and stuff like that? So I kind of planted that seed in him and a couple other of my coaches. And so I feel like that's how I can best look forward is thinking big picture, but I can act local. I can do something here locally to help maybe change the way people perceive or give others opportunities that I feel like I've been afforded.
Oh, and what a great, testament to what you're trying to do there at the school. I mean, you reached out to, one of your leaders and gave them that opportunity. And it sounds like they really embraced that and hit it out of the park. And together you're talking about moving it forward. Great, great leadership. Okay. Well, Chris, I've really enjoyed, talking with you today. You and I, we've traded some emails and some Twitter posts back and forth, but this is, I guess, the next best thing to meeting in person, but we're not done yet. We always like to wrap up with what we call the athletic director's toolbox. So I'm going to challenge you right now to send out a brand new athletic director on their very first job, but I'm only going to let you put 3 things in their toolbox. What 3 items are going to go into Chris Hall's athletic director toolbox?
So I think this has been probably the most interesting part of the podcast of listening to. I would say number 1 is flexibility. There's just, or adaptability. I mean, just things change from a minute's notice. All sorts of stuff happens. Transportation's late. The sprinklers came on. The lights aren't on. I mean, it's a litany of things that and you can do your best to prepare all you want, but sometimes things don't happen. Like we have automatic lights here, and you schedule them on a computer. Well, it always works great when you go in and you just set them to sunset, and they come on right before sunset and everything like that. And then all of a sudden your coach going, "It's really cloudy. Can you turn on the lights?" And I'm at my daughter's cheerleading practice picking her up, and I'm like, I'm not at a computer and I can't remember my password. So you're gonna have to give me like 5 minutes, and so there's just things that happen. So I think flexibility and adaptability, thinking on the fly, is definitely the first one. The second one is, and I do tell my coaches sometimes, and I'm like, you got to be a problem solver. Don't bring problems. You got to bring solutions. And so in this business, like, everyone's got problems, and I had someone tell me this. Is probably it's funny, but it says, like, the higher up you go, the bigger size of the turds, right? So, and he's like, you guys at some level are dealing with, like, mouse turds, and they're important to you, but here on some levels you got bigger, like, elephant-sized turds that you're dealing with. And so I don't know if that's the best analogy, but sometimes I'm like, I want to ask my coaches, like, hey, or not even coaches, sometimes it's teachers or anyone else, like, hey, I know that's important to you, but I'm also dealing with this right now, and this involves, maybe safety or getting kids to a game, and that can wait 30 minutes. Or if you really think about it, you could probably solve that on your own if you were just resourceful, or maybe ask somebody else. And I always challenge people when they ask questions. I'm like, hey, did you ask so-and-so? Like, you have a mentor, or especially like new coaches or new teachers, like, did you ask your mentor? Did you ask somebody? And I hate to, I don't want to sound like I blow people off, because I feel like I'm very open. I respond to text all hours of the day. I answer my phone at home. My wife gets all the time, like, turn your phone off. So I'm very open, but sometimes I just want to ask people, like, I try and handle, I guess, things on my own. And that's just kind of my personality. And so I guess that's something I wish as a trait that more people had, was that ability to maybe problem solve or just think for a few minutes. And so that maybe, I don't know, that might be a little bit of soapbox kind of standing, but that's just a funny thing. And then I guess, the third thing is, a lot of people have talked about communication. And I think effective communication is important. I know it's different too, and I had to learn this. I'm only in my 5th year as being an AD. And I go back and think back to my first or second year, like, man, I thought I was communicating clearly. or effectively, but maybe I wasn't. And now after you realize, some things didn't go the way you kind of expected. And so now I have a better understanding of like, hey, when I want to communicate certain things, I have to be effective. I've learned to consider who my audience is, or what exactly am I trying to communicate. And, what works for me does not always work for everybody else. And so I think that comes along with getting to know your coaches, getting to know your teachers, your students, your parents, and everything else like that. Is to be effective. I mean, you have to have that awareness of who you're talking to and stuff like that. And I think from my perspective, that's where I hopefully have grown the most in the last 4 or 5 years. I probably still have, light years to go, but so consider I'm in my 13th year overall in education. I have at least 17 or 18 to go till I can retire. So hopefully by then we'll have it figured out a lot better.
Yeah, well, again, I think you've got the right perspective. I like to joke, this is my 41st year as a teacher, coach, AD. So I've only got another, 9 or 10 good years left before it's downhill. But
Right.
no, the listening part, the communication things, those are tools that we pick up and hopefully get better at each year. I know when I finally learned to listen, I think I became a better AD. I got a comment on that one thing about the lights. We have the programmable lights as well.
Yeah.
And one night I get a phone call. I'm having dinner with my wife and our daughter. And we had rented our campus to a guy who I knew, but the lights hadn't got turned on for his event. And he wanted to know if I could come back to school. Well, fortunately, I had the app on my cell phone. And I just told him, I said, give me about 2 minutes. And so I was able to turn the lights on from my cell phone. So get that app if you don't already have it. That can be a lifesaver. Okay.
So the funny thing is I have the app, and it would have been, last summer, maybe 2 summers. I can't remember. My daughter was cheerleading, and so I was at her practice, and I was just walking around the trails waiting for her practice to end. And spring weather here, so one of our APs is getting on doing an announcement about watching a video to make sure all our young ladies and gentlemen are in compliance. So
that's okay. It's your working high school AD.
Yeah, right. And but anyway, so someone called me about the app, and I was like, man, I thought I could log in, and I didn't have the password. And I was like, what is the password? And because I had created it when I first got on the job, and it's in a notebook at school, and I'm like, great. So I called the lady, at the control link or whatever, and I called them. I'm like, yeah, so I'm the AD at this school. What's your password? I'm like, no idea. And she's like, I can't. I'm like, can you give me a hint? And she's like, no. And I'm like, you sure? Like, I was like, does it have Titans in it? She goes, you're on the right track. And I'm like, does it have a year after that? And so I kind of like narrowed it down and guessed it on like the 5th guess. And she was super nice. And I was like, man, please just turn it on. I was like, it was probably my fault. We had to reschedule, and I definitely think I forgot to turn the lights on. And but I also, after that moment, I went through and made sure that every one of my coaches has their login so that they can do it. And I told them, if you don't have it downloaded on your phone, then, call me if it's an emergency. But now all my coaches have it on their phone in the app. So I learned, I guess my lesson is don't be the only one that has the password either. Like, you kind of make sure other people can change it and have their roles, so they can only turn on their field, I guess.
No, again, great wisdom there. Chris Hall, what's the best way that one of our listeners can reach out and pick your brain? I know that you've talked about a lot of great things today. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my email is Chris, CHRIS.L as in Larry.Hall, and it's at GCPSK12.org. So it's Gwinnett County Public Schools K12.org. And there's only one period between the 12 and the org. And then I'm on Twitter at DHS Discovery High School _Titans. And I'm on there. That's one way to, I guess, follow me a little bit. And but I'm really good about responding to email. And that's probably the most important thing that we use today anyways.
Okay. Again, I encourage you, as a listener, I encourage you to reach out to Chris. He's got some great stuff on Twitter and other places too. Chris Hall, Discovery High School, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Appreciate it, Jake. Thanks for having me, and take care.
For our listeners, remember the Zoom recordings of these interviews are being uploaded to the FIAAA Educational AD Podcast YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in today. Come back again next time for another episode of the Educational AD.